Our webinar is streaming on YouTube. Welcome, dear participants, to this third session of the SDG Learning. I just want to make a note on the interpretation services that will be provided. If you want to change your language, you just have to select the button in between the Q&A section and the More button on the bottom on your screen. You'll see in the middle an interpretation ball. You click on the interpretation ball and you can select between English or Spanish for you to listen to the rest of the webinar in the language of your choice. And we will pass the floor now to the organizers who will lead you through this training. We have here Mr. Rami Arekat, who will be starting us off. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much, Pelayo. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear participants around the world. Welcome to session 3 of the SDGs Learning, Training, and Practice at the United Nations 2021 High-Level Political Forum. The title of our session today is Integrating Recovery Planning from COVID-19, Building Resilience and Strengthening Policy Coherence towards the Sustainable Development Goals. I am Sami Arakat, a Sustainable Development Officer at UNDESA Division for Sustainable Development Goals, and will be moderating this session along with my colleagues, Belen Pempikar and Shivangi Chavda. The partners of this session include actually a number of partners, UN and non-UN, and that include UNDESA, UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and we have 2 divisions from UNDESA with us, Division for Sustainable Development Goals and Division for Public Institution and Public and Digital Government. We have UNITAR, the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. We have Canias International, Canada, Europe, US, Asia, Africa Network. We have FILAC, the Fund for the Development of the Indigenous People of Latin America and the Caribbean. We have ANUSA, the United Nations Office for Space Affairs. And we have GNDR, the Global Network of Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Reduction. Now, the objective of our session, we plan actually to leverage all the expertise from the multi-stakeholder partners who are joining together in this session. We will have the chance to share with you latest methodologies and approaches that the partners have been working on recently and that contribute to sustainable recovery of the COVID-19 pandemic, and at the same time make progress in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. The structure of this session, we are having actually 3 parts. We have part 1 where we will learn about an open online course aimed at strengthening the capacity of national stakeholders to design, adapt, and implement integrated and coherent recovery plans and policies and building toward the SDGs implementation. We have part 2, which is about opportunities for learning about opportunities for integrating space-based solutions with indigenous knowledge, including participatory community-led methods for resilience and planning for recovery. And we have part 3, where we will learn about local resilience assessment tool view from the front line, VFL line, to understand the unique resilience challenges faced by communities and local perspective for inclusion in government structure. So what brings us what brings the three of us together is that it's all about building back better through integrated recovery planning and policy coherence, and addressing the challenges with inequalities and building an inclusive and resilient path that promotes the economic, social, and environmental dimension of sustainable development. Our expectations from the e-learning sessions are three parts. The same thing. In part one, we expect that there will be understanding and knowledge of an e-learning course that has been developed by the partners, UNDESA and UNITAR, about integrating recovery planning for the SDGs. And we have part two that will focus on supporting in general, and what we expect from part two is learning how to support Indigenous sustainability by developing integrated knowledge forms and application work together without boundaries. And what we expect from part three is capture the specific social, economic, and environmental threats and vulnerabilities faced by disabled population. What I'm going to do here actually is trying to, I have some issues with my slides. Medina, is everything going well?
Yeah, it's fine now.
Yeah, okay. So what we are having actually here, excuse me, just try to deal with my slides. But we are now switching actually to the, Medina, I cannot control the slide. I'm not sure what happened. Just please give me 1 minute. I'm really sorry.
Could you please stop sharing and reshare again your screen?
Yeah, I think that's what I should do. Thank you.
We see your slides, Sami?
You see it there? Okay.
Yes.
I think is that I cannot move the slides. I'm not sure what's happening here. So we are moving now to the welcoming remarks by the session partners, UNDESA and UNITAR, CANIAS, FILAC, ANUSA, and GNDR. And we are starting the welcoming remarks on behalf of UNDESA and UNITAR by my colleague and chief of the United Nations of the National Strategies and Capacity Building Branch of the Division for Sustainable Development Goals, Mr. Amson Sibanda. Amson is leading the planning and coordination of the capacity building effort and responding to member states' urgent and high priority needs on behalf of the Division for Sustainable Development Goals. And that increased a lot, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sami. Good morning, colleagues. Good afternoon, colleagues, and good evening. I know we are all spread around the world because of the COVID situation. Distinguished participants, government representatives, and national stakeholders, United Nations colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome all of you to this SDGs learning, training, and practice session that is being held during the 2021 High-Level Political Forum. This session will focus on integrating recovery planning from COVID-19, building resilience and strengthening policy coherence towards the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm also very glad to join our session partners, Kanyas International, FELAC, UNUSA, and the GNDR, and welcome you on behalf of the project team of UNDESA and UNITAR, e-learning course on integrated recovery planning and policy coherence towards the SDGs. The e-learning course to be introduced by the first panel of the session has been developed by UNDESA and the UNITAR and aims at strengthening the capacity of national stakeholders to formulate, adapt, and implement integrated and coherent plans and policies and improve decision-making among national stakeholders involved in countries' recovery planning from the COVID-19 pandemic and rebuilding back better towards the Sustainable Development Goals implementation. I would like to take this opportunity to thank members of the course team from UNDESA and UNITAR for the hard work and tremendous effort and dedication that resulted in developing the timely course with its recovery focus and transformation towards the SDGs. Since the course had been developed earlier this year, it was first offered and facilitated in the West Asia and North Africa region to 6 countries, and these are Iraq, Somalia, Lebanon, Sudan, Egypt, and Morocco. The course has also been adapted as a massive open online course that is self-paced, flexible, and free of charge for the benefit of member states and their stakeholders and anyone who is interested to take it. Part 1 of the session today will provide an introduction and overview of the open online course that can be very helpful to a broad range of national stakeholders, be they policymakers, senior planners, civil society, academic, people from academia, and the private sector who are involved in the recovery planning in their countries and working to rebuild towards the SDGs. Part 2 and Part 3 of the session, we also leverage expertise from our partners and introduce additional methodologies and approaches established to strengthen the capacity in contributing to sustainable recovery of the COVID-19 pandemic and making progress in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Through a sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 crisis, countries have an unprecedented opportunity to steer transformations toward more resilient and sustainable economies and societies and move forward in a better direction. I therefore wish this session of the SDGs Learning, Training, and Practice at the United Nations 2021 High-Level Political Forum a great success, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Amson. Thanks for your welcoming and introductory remarks. Thank you for leading and coordinating the capacity building effort at UNDESA Division for Sustainable Development Goals. And thank you for your support to the development of the e-learning course and investing the time and the resources to make sure we can provide guidance to the national stakeholders of member states and strengthen their capacity and the integrated recovery from COVID-19 toward the Sustainable Development Goals. Now we are continuing our welcoming remarks of session 3 partners. It will be moderated by my colleague Milan Pimprikar. But before giving the floor to my colleague Milan, who will introduce the welcoming remarks by the rest of the partner representatives, I just need to say a few words about Milan and his role in the organization of the session. Milan is the founder and chairman of Kanyas, that stands for Canada, Europe, US, Asia, Africa Network. He is influential network connector and builder, connecting the haves and have-nots. His focus is on transitioning innovative technologies-based solutions to serve humanity collective safety, security, and prosperity. Meland also created many other relevant technology transitioning centers through public-private partnerships to support the capacity development needs of developing and least developed countries. His creative work and activities are all in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda for All. His work also is a very good example of the important roles of civil society, research centers, NGOs, can play in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in developing and least developed countries. I started working with Meland on the preparation for this learning session during the last 2 months. And actually, I found myself working with one of the most dedicated and hardworking colleagues. He is an amazing team player, a good planner, and organizer. He always does his part on time, then starts contacting with other team members and offering his support and going out of his way to help. Time is not enough to allow me to give Meland enough justice. And on behalf of all the session partners, we thank you, Meland, for all your hard work and support to ensure the success of the learning session. My co-moderator, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Sammy. I think you too much actually on the my contribution. It's all the collective efforts that all of us, and I'm really grateful that we could make this happen. So just to begin with, again, thanks to all the panelists and participants for joining this learning session. As Sammy mentioned, and the opening keynote by UNITAR, Mr. Simbada, that this is going to be a very interesting, unique learning session. We have a very comprehensive UNITAR, UNDESA's, and also supported by our partners from FILAC, the Indigenous communities, the UNOSA, and of course the GNDR, the Global Society Network for Disaster Reduction. So I would like to just keep it in time because we are trying to make sure that basically we have the privilege to get hands-on from the training parts of the 3 components. So to begin with, I would like to invite our partner, FILAC, which is the Fund for the Latin American and Caribbean countries, Dr. Mirna Cunningham. I understand that Mirna is positive with COVID and she's not feeling well. So our wishes to her for a fast recovery. And I would like to invite our colleague replacing her, the Technical Secretary of FILAC, Mr. Gabriel Miguel. Mr. Miguel.
Muy buenos días para todos, buenas tardes, buenas noches a los que ya están a esa hora. Muchas gracias, Milín, por por darme la palabra. Muchas gracias también a Sammy, al doctor Amson, que acabó de expresar su mensaje. De verdad estamos muy contentos por esta actividad que hemos podido conjuntamente con todos los colegas organizar. Quiero expresar un fraternal saludo a nombre del FILAC, presentar las excusas debidas a nombre de la señora presidenta Mirna Cunningham. Como le ha dicho Melín, ella se encuentra un poco recuperándose de su salud. Esperamos que todo salga bien para que esté, como siempre, en todos estos eventos, liderando, dando sus mensajes, ayudando a impulsar. Pero estamos aquí para contribuir de acuerdo a nuestras experiencias y de acuerdo en el trabajo conjuntamente con todos ustedes, porque definitivamente consideramos que el cumplimiento de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible de las ODS es fundamental y es necesario para lograr cambios en el mundo para todos los pueblos, pero especialmente de los pueblos indígenas. Estamos cerca de conmemorar el Día Internacional de los Pueblos Indígenas y no puede ser más oportuno el lema elegido por el Foro Permanente sobre Cuestiones Indígenas de las Naciones Unidas: no dejar nadie atrás, los pueblos indígenas, el llamado a un nuevo contrato social. Estas oportunidades, estos espacios, consideramos de suma importancia para poner en diálogo intercultural entre avances técnicos científicos, como las que impulsan las organizaciones colegas y amigos, aliados estratégicos, y lo que los pueblos indígenas también vienen desarrollando. Hace ya 6 años, en el 2015, todos sabemos, fue aprobado por los jefes de Estado, por los gobiernos, por mucha gente, los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible. Desafortunadamente, los derechos indígenas, las voces indígenas no quedaron ampliamente incluidos, pese a que juegan un papel y un rol importante. Sin embargo, los pueblos indígenas y nosotros al lado, como FILAC, al lado de ellos, hemos venido trabajando. Y qué bueno que en el marco de este foro, del foro político de alto nivel, se esté dando esta actividad. Revisar y poder desde la revisión trazar una ruta estratégica para que en los años siguientes los objetivos de desarrollo de verdad en la práctica se puedan implementar de manera complementaria entre los distintos esfuerzos, consideramos fundamental. Pero en ese proceso consideramos esencial la participación directa y efectiva de los pueblos indígenas en las distintas expresiones. Todos sabemos la gran diversidad de pueblos indígenas en el mundo, alrededor del mundo. Estamos hablando de aproximadamente 5,000 pueblos indígenas. En América Latina estamos hablando de 800 pueblos indígenas, una gran diversidad de visiones de la vida, de visiones de desarrollo, de idiomas. Es una gran riqueza que creo que solo la misma diversidad étnica y cultural contribuye mucho a la situación actual del mundo para superar. Estamos trabajando arduamente hacia el summa causae, es decir, hacia el vivir bien para el buen vivir. Esperamos presentar una propuesta como una respuesta desde la visión de los pueblos indígenas que el FILAC viene trabajando en la próxima Asamblea General del FILAC, que va a ser en la primera semana de agosto próximo, del 2 al 5 de agosto. Así que qué bueno, y esperamos todos que conjuntamente con UNESA, UNITAR, CANEOS, UNOSA y todos los demás podamos seguir trabajando de esta manera, y estamos seguros que vamos a tener una buena incidencia, vamos a poder impulsar procesos positivos en favor de los cambios que necesitamos de manera positiva para la humanidad, para los pueblos, en este caso para los pueblos indígenas. Muchas gracias, Milín. Muchas gracias a todos y a todos. Esperamos que sea provechoso esta jornada, este ejercicio de aprendizaje y de impulso de las ODS. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mugwe. Now I'd like to invite the presentation, opening remarks from the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, esteemed UN colleagues, the organizing partners. It is my privilege and great honor for me to present the Director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs in this HLPF 2021 SDG learning session, featuring distinguished speakers and panelists with the objective to highlight, introduce latest methodologies and approaches to strengthen sustainable recovery of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also to make progress on the implementation of the 2030 agenda and the SDG. In this regard, as you will hear, space exploration and applications encompass immense transformative power across many industries, sectors, and daily activities. Stemming from the growing realization of transformative power of space, we are now witnessing a revolution in the space sector. More and more stakeholders are entering in the field, investing human, financial, and political resources to become part of this frontier field. Today, space is indeed a game changer, underpinning our daily activities, industries, and many scientific fields, and is also key for a well-informed decision-making and policy-making. In the context of the SDGs, geolocation and Earth observation benefit almost 40% of all the 169 targets underpinning the SDGs. If we would add SATCOM, we are likely well over 50%. It is evident that without space, our quest for integrated recovery, planning from COVID-19 and building resilience for a better future would considerably more difficult, if not impossible. As you will hear in part 2 of today's session, disaster management is an apt example. Satellites help us identify disaster-prone areas and safe locations, enable early warnings, facilitate search and rescue operations, delivery of humanitarian aid, assess damages, or provide reliable communication. This area of action provides us just one example, underscoring the critical role space assets play in sustainable development. As we look ahead, there is no future where space would not be a critical tool to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal. For this reason, it is with great appreciation to be invited and join forces with the distinguished organizing partners and to have the opportunity to shed light on the innovative approaches to capacity building we employ at the Office for Outer Space Affairs to make access to space truly universal. Thank you very much, and I do wish you an exciting session. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. It was a very very informative. I'd like to invite now Mr. Vijay Kumar, the Executive Director of the Global Network for Disaster Reduction. Mr. Vijay Kumar.
Thanks, Milind. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, friends, colleagues, partners, and our co-travelers. As Milind said, my name is Vijay Kumar. I represent the global network of civil society organizations pursuing the disaster reduction. We are a network of 1,500 plus organizations from across 128 countries. What we are trying to do, we are trying to pursue an agenda of risk-informed development by adopting localization as an approach. We have been confronting, all of us, poverty, inequality, and the adverse impact of climate change for quite some time. And these are quite interrelated. We always knew it has a disproportionate impact. But what pandemic, the COVID did, it magnified and exposed the inequalities, poverty, and the impact of the climate change that we experience today. And that is what is magnified. What we are trying to do by engaging in these views from the front line, we are trying to engage the power over, by, or with the powers of the citizens. How we do that? We approach with a fourfold focus. Number one, we try to see how the perspectives of the community is captured, and nobody is left behind. Their perspectives is captured. That is informing local, national, global planning processes and policy formulations. We are also looking at how this disaggregated data is helping the communities most at risk being empowered. We are also looking at how the disaggregated data is primarily looking at the impact of the various SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, from local, national, and global, and also the global frameworks, and to see how we can bring policy coherence. And last but not the least, we're also trying to see how the governments can be accountable, can be made accountable by looking at the numbers, looking at the perspectives, and looking at the lived-in experiences. I really look forward to listen to all the experiences and all the methodology that is used, and I'm sure together we can make a huge difference and we can prevent the hazards becoming a disaster. All the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vijay Kumar. I know we are running a little bit late behind the time, so I would like to, with this opening and with the welcoming from all the partners, to begin with the first part of our training program, which is developed by UNITAR and UNITAR. And again, like to request Mr. Sami to moderate the first panel for the first segment of this training session. So, Sami.
Thank you very much, Milind. And I would like actually to share the screen again. I really hope that you can see the screen very well. Medina, how things going?
It's fine.
Okay, thank you very much. I think as Milan said, time is really getting short, and we try to keep the things on time. We have so many things to do and introduce in this session. So the part one of the session is about introduction and overview of the open online course, Integrated Recovery Planning and Policy Coherence towards the SDGs and its five modules. That will be overviewed by my colleagues, Ms. Veronique Verbruggen from UNITAR and my colleague Elena Proden from UNITAR. We are also having our colleagues Medina Emaraliva and Cecilia Tan providing support. Veronique, Elena, Medina, Cecilia, and myself with support from our Chief Anson Sibanda makes the course development team members. We have also been supported by Mr. Darren Swanson, a distinguished consultant during the development process. So the program we are having for this session is 3 parts, and we have Veronique and Elena that they will talk about the course for 17 minutes. Then we will conduct a brief poll for 3 minutes. Medina will help doing that. And then we will open the floor for questions and answers. And you can start actually writing your questions on the chat of the Zoom. So we can select questions for answers by the panelists. Now, the first part, I'm glad to introduce the first panelist, Ms. Veronique Verbruggen, who is a senior interregional advisor on governance and public institutions at UNDESA, Department of Public Institutions and Digital Government. Veronique supports the UN member states with the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular SDG 16, promoting just, peaceful, and inclusive societies, in particular in the area of institutional and policy coherence and public sector reform. She will highlight the linkage between the building blocks on institutional arrangements for policy coherence and the steps for integrated recovery planning and policy coherence. Veronique, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sami. And dear participants, welcome again to this learning event. In this presentation, I would like to expand on, first of all, what the learning tool is, and also when you can use it. As the tool also envisages to enhance more coherent policies, I will shortly expand on this. And then my colleague, Elena, will explain in more detail the different modules of the tool. So we've noticed that in times of nationwide crisis like this pandemic, the people turn to the state and its institutions for leadership and unified action. We have seen some rapid and really effective responses by governments in many respects, also responses that showed the ability to act in alignment with public health measures, which involved changing our behavior in a pretty fundamental manner. But what we've also seen is that it has exposed shortfalls in resiliency to the crisis, including in the way, not in the least, in the way how inequalities have been addressed. But rather than listing the daunting, unprecedented consequences that we've all heard about over the last months and the scale of the problems following the pandemic, I would like to stress the unprecedented opportunities of this pandemic, looking ahead beyond the immediate responses to the health and economic crisis to chart a new policy course and steer behavioral changes towards resilient and sustainable economies. First slide, please. So in the first instance, the objective of the e-learning tool is to support sustainable recovery. sustainable recovery, developing policies that better orient investments and support behavioral changes to reduce vulnerabilities. The tool gives a stepwise overview, so you will see the different steps on this slide that I said, Elena will elaborate upon, with a set of methods underpinned by system thinking to co-create policy solutions by involving different stakeholders. So it is a participatory approach, and that is also, I will expand a bit on that later on. Now, when can it be used? I think it's important to emphasize that the approach is not meant to be used in case of disaster response emergency planning. This is the latter is focused on immediate objectives for addressing emergency solutions. But this approach is more used in light of the voluntary national or local reviews, national development planning and review of those planning processes. And it can certainly be used to make sure that recovery plans aimed at short term are in line with and identify objectives that can leverage the implementation of the SDGs and increase sustainable economic growth. So we've seen that over the last months, some governments have started to develop recovery plans, but very often disregarding a bit the long-term objectives. So we would like to emphasize the importance of this tool that would basically try to make sure that long-term objectives will be addressed. So the SDG framework is useful to attain sustainable recovery, yet we noticed that achievement of the SDGs has slowed down due to the pandemic. Second slide, please. So the approach is meant to enhance planning and implementation of integrated or coherent policies, rather than isolated sector-based policies. So we know that there needs to be a convergence among different agendas and policies. This is also not a new agenda. The aspect of integrated and coherent policies has been highlighted over many years already, but I think that this pandemic highlights even more the need to do so in development integrated recovery plans. So on this slide, you can see the different building blocks that are important to ensure policy and institutional coherence. But as we are short of time, I will only focus on a few that are key to this approach. So first of all, as I've already mentioned, the tool will help governments to link short-term with long-term planning. During this pandemic, governments have changed their focus, necessarily so, from implementation of the national development plans to short-term recovery plans. But what matters is that these plans would need to consider, as I've already mentioned, again, long-term consequences of today's decisions. Precisely because unprecedented recovery investments are now being made, and we've heard in many countries, the investments are huge, governments would need to avoid investing into sectors depleting natural resources, exacerbating climate change, avoid to boost traditional industry that create loss of biodiversity and create local pollution, or avoid to weaken standards. They would have bold steps to fight the impact of global warming, and the same is definitely true for fighting inequality, which we've seen is on the rise following the pandemic. If current investments do not consider long-term consequences, countries might be trapped in a negative spiral of expensive, unsustainable development choices. Another building block that is mentioned in this on this slide is strong political commitment and leadership, given the potential for conflict among various interests and priorities. And so, as I've said, this is a participatory approach, and it's supposed to involve policymakers, decision makers from the public sector, the private sector, and in civil society or foundations, academic world. So therefore, strong political leadership is needed to shape the national debate and support recovery strategies. A third aspect that I would like to emphasize is the system thinking. The system thinking approach lies also at the basis of this approach. Now, COVID-19 is without doubt the most comprehensive real-time experimentation of the devastating effects of missing or weak policy coherence, whereby governments had quickly to realize the limits of thinking and operating in silos and adopting a single health policy approach to fighting the pandemic. Governments needed to address questions like how to reconcile travel and other health restrictions with labor migration, remittance flows, which have been reduced drastically, resulting in declining economic activity. So multiple issues and multiple aspects to deal with at the same time. The tool contains approaches to identify and visualize interlinkages more effectively to balance divergent social, environmental, and economic priorities and make investments more effective and maximize well-being. And then finally, I would like to refer to the issue of stakeholders' engagement. Because coordinated and coherent actions at all levels of government and beyond government is needed. The next slide, please. To foster public trust and meet the most immediate needs while maintaining political and economic stability as well as social cohesion, meaningful participation of stakeholders is also key to this approach, and I insist on the word meaningful. The tool provides mechanisms for participation through which governments and key stakeholders can come together to identify common challenges, set priorities, mobilize resources. Stakeholders will understand the interconnections and linkages between policies and will help identify leverage points to accelerate change. On this issue also Elena will expand. Meaningful engagement with all parts of society means including those groups in society that are not well represented, so not the usual suspects, but also those who are unorganized, like those who are working in the informal economy. By now, about half of the global workforce, or also, as was highlighted, as other partners will expand on in this session, Indigenous people. With the local government then finally playing a key role in the delivery of services, which is what we've seen, they played a key role during the pandemic and they still play a key role. And also with the fact that 13 of the 17 SDGs being about service delivery, it is key to engage subnational levels properly in the integrated recovery planning in order to minimize crisis management failures. And Sami will maybe also expand a bit on that, sharing some experiences from our work in the Arab region. So now over to Elena.
Thank you very much, Veronique, for your part of the presentation. And now we are moving to Elena, who will present, who will overview actually the course with us and its building blocks. Elena, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So I think overviewing the course would be probably challenging given the time limit that we have, but the idea would be to provide a few insights into how the course is structured and with what exactly learners will go away once they've taken this course in terms of learning outcomes, but also the core of the methodology that is presented in the course. Before I jump into the substance, I would like to acknowledge the support of the Swiss government and more specifically Swiss Development Cooperation to UNITAR in refining and piloting the methodology and learning resources that are at the core of the e-learning course that we are presenting today. So basically, as you can see here on this wheel, there are several key steps through which one goes when one applies this methodology. When we say the methodology, we actually talk about strategic planning methodology that uses participatory approach, as mentioned by Veronique on the one hand. It uses also a combination, builds on the qualitative dimension a lot, but acknowledges also the importance of robust quantitative data and evidence as an additional dimension in the process, as the stakeholders discuss issues, analyze them jointly. They can draw on this evidence, but that what is actually what will count ultimately would be really the ownership by stakeholders of what will be agreed as part of this strategic planning exercise. So really, the idea is to move while building, for example, on the important modeling work supported by robust data, to help stakeholders discuss the issues using this evidence, and then really jointly build, negotiate responses, which they will be owning as a community, and for the implementation of which they will be responsible. Now, in terms of the approach, there are several key steps in the approach, and the modules in the e-learning course were structured in this way. So there is a specific sequence that one should normally follow. In the first module, there is an overview related to some of the issues that Veronique discussed in the first part, the importance of integrated planning also in the context of rapid recovery and the linkages with the long-term planning, and some of the issues then that I reviewed in more detail throughout the course. Then the other modules follow a specific logic, with the module 2 dedicated fully to the mapping and analysis of interests and influence of various stakeholders who are key to building a particular strategy. And then also applying the participatory approach. It's really about doing this sort of first step, engaging with stakeholders and bringing them on board. Then in module 3, the stakeholders are invited with the support of the methodologies that are presented in the module to do jointly the analysis using system thinking to identify what we call critical connections between various SDG areas, and in particular leverage points. And I will come back to this question right after this slide. So we will talk a little bit how this step is different from the traditional strategic planning exercise. And then after that, in module 4, basically building on this analysis, stakeholders will be offered methodology to identify strategic policy options, and then based on those policy options to identify bundles of policy options or policy pathways that could be transformative, strategic, and also robust. And that could form the core of the, for example, National Sustainable Development Strategy, or if this is used in the context of Rapid Recovery Plan, that could be also the case, but with really the consideration given to the long-term perspective. And finally, module 5 focuses on other key parts of the policy cycle. After the strategy or policy has been developed, also how this is translated into budget allocations, what kind of monitoring and evaluation needs to take place while the policy or strategy is being implemented, etc. So those issues are reviewed in module 5. Next slide, please. Just very quickly, a few points to give you sort of insights in how this is different from the traditional strategic planning approach. So here, really, the idea is to move away from the linear root cause analysis. Of course, understanding deeper roots and causes is part of what we need to do, but we need to acknowledge that there are important feedback loops between various policies and actions. And when we look at the SDGs between various policies and actions between various SDGs sectors and areas. So the idea is really to use system thinking, system analysis to help identify these critical feedback loops. And then also looking at those where perhaps feedback loop has a shorter time horizon, but also those that have a longer time horizon, so that longer term effects could also be taken into account. And then once this analysis is done, what would emerge normally from this work would be the strategic leverage points. So what we call the leverage points are typically policies that have the greatest systemic impact across all SDGs. And then the next slide, please. Basically, once this is done, we know the leverage points, the policy areas where we need to act. Then the stakeholders can brainstorm together on possible policy options. And once the policy options are identified, they need to be brought together into policy pathways or bundles of policy options that would form the basis of the strategy. So those policy pathways need to be transformative, address the leverage points, coherent and strategic between themselves, meaning that the trade-offs between them need to be minimized. And finally, they need to be robust and adaptive, meaning that they should be performing well as expected across a range of possible scenarios. I think the COVID situation has also shown us how important it is for policies to be robust, and how important to do this scenario-based analysis. And the methodology proposed in the course is really about how can one go through these steps. Next slide, please. So here is just an example of the system map with some leverage points identified. If you click again. So you can see, for example, on the system maps, we can analyze positive and negative feedback loops, drivers, and also leverage points. The next slide, please. So recognizing these leverage points is important to really building a transformative strategy. Then, in addition to that, through a multi-stakeholder approach, possible policy options need to be identified that are relevant to the specific context. Here, for example, you have the example with two policy areas, climate action and preventing zoonotic spillover. And then there are various policy options. You will not necessarily apply all of them. Some of them may be even conflicting with each other. So one way to go about this, for example, you can build a coherent policy set by combining some of them. Another way could be also that you can analyze them on their impact potential. You can see that they are colored in different ways. For example, the ones that are green and blue have the highest impact. If we click once again, we will see this heat matrix, basically, that shows you in the top right corner, the green color means that this is the policy with the highest potential impact and achievability. The blue ones are close to it, but are less impactful or achievable. And then the yellow ones have the less likelihood and less impact. So next slide, please. Once you have your policy pathways, you would also need to test them against possible scenarios of how things may evolve. For example, of course, in the COVID context, we have to do a lot of scenario planning, considering various options. And then you may wish to test your policy pathways against various scenarios. So here, during the robustness testing, you can see, for example, pathways 1, 2, and 3, and how they perform. And you can see on the x-axis different scenarios. In scenario 1, scenario 2, 3, and 4. And you can see that, for example, pathway 1 seems to be the one that is perhaps performing is most robust. Perhaps it's not performing as well as the pathway 2, but it's performing better in all scenarios. So this is really the key ideas from the methodology that are presented in the e-learning course. And there is a very detailed explanation for each of the steps on how to go about it, with the case studies, demos, and also hands-on exercises. And if you are interested, we invite you to enroll in the course. It's free of charge, available online. Take it. You can also contact us, ask if you have any questions. We will be happy to answer them. And I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Elena, for this overview of the course and its 5 modules and building blocks for integrated recovery planning and policy coherence. I think with the overview from Elena and from Veronique, I believe we have a very good idea about what the course is about. However, to know the details and to benefit from the course, you need to enroll and take the course, and you will find that it has been designed in a way to help national stakeholders and all people who are involved in recovery planning, especially at this time as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. So with this, I think we are running out of time. I really apologize for this. And we need to work hard to manage time better. But just one thing, as Elena just mentioned, we have the course. It's self-paced, flexible, and free of charge for the benefit of member states, their national stakeholders, and anyone interested to take it, especially those involved in countries' recovery planning from COVID-19 pandemic and rebuilding back better toward the SDGs. We have actually the course listed on this link that you can see here. And at the same time, you can take it actually directly from UNITAR platform at this link, or you can go to SDGs Knowledge Platform, and there is a link to the course. So I think although we are running out of time, this is the thing now. We have to take a poll, and it's for 3 minutes, following the overview by the panelists. We need actually assistance from our colleagues, Medina, to run the poll. It shouldn't take more than 3 minutes. Basically, we want to know how interesting the course can be to you and how we can make it better. Medina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sami. I'm starting the poll now. We have 50% complete. I believe we can finish the poll in a few seconds. The majority of the attendees participated, so I will give 5 more seconds. And ending the poll, and we'll share the results. Let me quickly go over the results. So for the first question, are you interested in this course? Most of the attendees replied that they're planning to enroll. And there are also 35 attendees who are already enrolled in this course. For the second question, to what extent this course preview has increased your understanding of possible approaches to and the value of integrated planning to ensure consistency between short-term and long-term responses and across sectorial policies? Most of the participants, they've replied very significantly and to a large extent. So with this, I will stop sharing and pass the floor back to you, Sami.
Thank you very much, Medina. I know that we are running out of time. And because of that, actually, we allocated 10 minutes for the questions and answers. And unfortunately, we cannot get into the time of the other parts of the session. However, I see that there have been a lot of questions written in the chat, and we will be getting back to you with all answers and clarifications from the panelists and the project team, the course team. And at the same time, we will be sharing with you all the information and presentations and things that can help you down the road once you will take the course. And at the same time, we'll make sure that you have all the information and all the material you need. This seminar, this webinar, this learning session is just the starting points. And we appreciate the time of all the attendees, and we will make sure that we work together down the road. And with this, I would like to thank you for listening to part one of our learning session. And I want to thank you with all the languages of the world. And with this, I give the floor back to my co-moderator, Milind, so he can facilitate and moderate part two of the learning session. Milind, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sami. Thank you, everyone. What we would like to do now is that to leverage what has been learned in the part one. So we would like to take some of the ideas and some of those lessons or some of the what Veronique and Elena had mentioned, especially co-creating and especially how we bring this, to these lessons from this COVID-19. So the second challenge for us is especially the indigenous communities, as the technical secretary of FILAC at the opening remark he mentioned. So what we would like to do is that how do we integrate some of these the solutions that we have been seeing from this the first part or from the other ones, and how do we leverage the indigenous knowledge along with those solutions. So in the second part, our goal is to integrate some of the indigenous knowledges and the traditional solutions, including space technology or space solutions that has been mentioned by the UNITAR's Ms. Simonetta De Pipo at the opening remarks. And then how do we create some kind of co-creation of the solution, as Veronica had mentioned, co-creation, and especially with the participatory approach. So our colleague, the panelist here, Dr. Lily Isi, will discuss some of the issues on participatory issues. Our FILAC technical secretary, Mr. Gabriel Miguel, will discuss the challenges, especially incorporating indigenous knowledges. And then we have our UNOSA colleague who will be presenting on the massive online course, which the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs has created with number of other partners. And then finally, we will have the input from our distinguished colleague Professor Ilan Kalman, how we not to face the lessons learned from here so that we don't again encounter those situations moving forward 2030 or the pandemic. So with this one, I would like to invite first Shirish, if you can put the screen for our part, our presentation. Shirish, the screen sharing is with you. Yes. So as I was mentioning, basically we have the distinguished 4 panelists who will address these 4 issues, especially the challenges for integrating indigenous knowledge with this and what the opportunities that can be offered with this co-creation and participatory approach. So the first presentation will be from Gabriel Migwe, the Technical Secretary of FILAC, after which Dr. Lilia will discuss about these participatory approaches and solutions. Before we begin these 2 presentations, we would like to hear from the audience in terms of how their interest or using some of the indigenous knowledge and solutions. So we will do a brief, very quick poll in terms of understanding the level of understanding in this learning part, how you using these approaches. So Shirish, if we can go into the next slide. So the first question that we will be asking is in terms of, does your organization use some of the indigenous knowledge, especially in terms of to facilitate this pandemic recovery and to build resilience? So I would like to request our colleague Madina to help us with this process. And then right after this question response we receive from you, we will invite the distinguished speaker panelist from FILAC, Mr. Gabriel Migwe, the Technical Secretary, who will take these responses from this question and try to address what are the challenges the indigenous communities are facing. So please go ahead with your response to this question, marking yes, you are using at the moment in the partnership with indigenous people. No, I mean, not currently, but you are looking for ways to engage. Or number 3, which is you are not pursuing this approach. So with this,
we have the polling running. So we have
yes,
around 50% of the attendees who replied. Maybe we can wait a couple of seconds.
sure. So we have the results pretty much.
Yes. Perhaps we can give 10 more seconds and then we
Sure.
can stop the poll. Okay, ending the poll and sharing the results.
So this is a very interesting results in terms of there is almost half of those who are using, or at least they have some partnership with indigenous people communities. That's so encouraging. And equally encouraging is that there is, even though they are not using at the moment, but they are looking for the ways to engage. And so what we would like to do now with the next 20 minutes or 15 minutes is learn how to use this, how to make this happen. So first I would like to invite the distinguished Technical Secretary from FILAC, outlining the challenges of what challenges the indigenous communities are facing to incorporate this indigenous knowledge into this recovery process. So Mr. Migwe.
Nuevamente, muchísimas gracias. nuevamente también un saludo a todos los participantes. Veo que hay una gran cantidad de personas que están participando en esta webinar, en este conversatorio, este diálogo intercultural. Casi 200 personas y seguramente son muchos más por otros medios, cosa que de verdad nos anima mucho, nos alegra mucho esa participación. Segundo lugar, quiero agradecer antes de hacer los planteamientos por la encuesta, porque veo que un buen porcentaje, 42% de los participantes tienen interés, están trabajando, están teniendo en cuenta los temas indígenas, los derechos indígenas, la realidad indígena. Eso me parece muy significativo, de verdad, y muy importante. También el interés que algunos, aunque no están todavía trabajando, pero un 41% tienen interés de articular. Sumado sería más del 80%, cosa que nos parece muy, muy importante. Otros que no dijeron que no, que es un porcentaje muy bajo. Bueno, los animamos a que también se interesen, ojalá articulen. Así que muchas gracias por ese ejercicio de la encuesta que me da pie para decir algunos puntos en relación a lo que nos corresponde plantear. En primer lugar, quiero reiterar que alrededor del mundo hay una gran diversidad de pueblos indígenas con una gran riqueza cultural, una gran riqueza lingüística, una gran riqueza que permite mantener la biodiversidad, que realmente es donde están los recursos estratégicos para el desarrollo económico y el bienestar de toda la humanidad. Y no tener en cuenta esto en la implementación de las ODS, pues es una falencia, es un vacío, que si no se toman medidas, si no se revisan, pues afectaría esencialmente a la implementación adecuada de las ODS. No es posible hablar de superación de pobreza si no se tiene en cuenta a los pueblos indígenas que protegen más del 25% del planeta Tierra, donde están los recursos estratégicos. En el caso de América Latina, según un estudio que hace poco publicamos junto con la FAO, da cuenta que el 27% del territorio de la región de América Latina y el Caribe es territorio indígena en cualquier figura jurídica. Y allí están los recursos naturales esenciales para el desarrollo, para superar la pobreza, para el desarrollo cultural, en fin, todo lo que está planteado en los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible. Y por eso consideramos nosotros como FILAC fundamental la inclusión de las visiones de las riquezas que los pueblos tienen milenariamente. No es de todo el conocimiento científico, técnico de nuestros pueblos que también son milenarios. Dicho esto, quisiera un poco en el marco de lo que se ha orientado para este conversatorio, decirles que la pandemia de la COVID-19 ha afectado, el impacto de la pandemia ha sido de manera grave, fuerte, especialmente en los pueblos indígenas. Por supuesto, no desconocemos el impacto en toda la humanidad, en todos los sectores poblacionales, pero los pueblos indígenas, por su condición cultural, por su marginación, por su exclusión histórica en la atención y garantía de los derechos, han tenido un impacto particularmente grave. Nosotros como FILAC hemos venido haciendo un seguimiento desde el principio, cuando apareció o empezó a expandirse a lo largo y ancho del mundo y de la región de América Latina el COVID. Creamos una instancia de articulación y diálogo intercultural, de seguimiento sistemático. Se estableció la Plataforma Indígena Regional de América Latina, que articula distintas organizaciones de los países y subregionales, como también un diálogo con las autoridades de salud de los estados y gobiernos de la región. Y fruto de ese diálogo, a instancias del Observatorio de Derechos del FILAC, hemos sistematizado y producido 4 informes, 3 informes que tienen que ver sobre el impacto, y el último y cuarto informe que acabamos de presentar el 10 de junio pasado, que tiene que ver con la campaña de vacunas. En todos esos documentos trabajados de manera articulada con los pueblos indígenas, con los gobiernos y con organismos especializados del Sistema de Naciones Unidas como la OMS, la OPS, para el caso de la región, pues dan cuenta de una atención no adecuada culturalmente a los pueblos indígenas. Incluso la falta de acceso a las vacunas, que es muy preocupante. La falta de una atención culturalmente pertinente de manera intercultural. Esos documentos ustedes lo pueden encontrar y podemos compartir a través de los colegas a todos los asistentes el link, y ahí pueden encontrar esos informes en donde da cuenta de todo lo que estoy comentando. Esto para decirles que es fundamental que hacia el futuro de la implementación de las ODS y en estos cursos se incluya la visión integral de los pueblos indígenas, se incluya la metodología del diálogo intercultural entre pueblos indígenas, entre estados y gobiernos, entre las agencias de Naciones Unidas. Por una parte, eso. Por otro lado, quisiera también plantear, como ustedes saben, en los 17 objetivos que están planteados en las ODS, no se contempló de manera clara, precisa, se garantizó desafortunadamente la participación efectiva de los pueblos indígenas. Solo uno de los objetivos hace una mención muy general. En general, los objetivos plantean de pueblos vulnerables, de comunidades empobrecidas, pero no se tiene en cuenta la visión cultural. Y entonces es necesario darle una proyección en todos estos cursos, y para que eso suceda, definitivamente no es posible de otra manera sino garantizando la participación de una u otra manera de los pueblos indígenas, de los voceros. En todas las 7 regiones del mundo hay pueblos indígenas, hay liderazgos, hay organizaciones, y yo recomendaría desde la experiencia y trabajo del FILAC garantizar la participación en todos estos procesos de capacitación, de actualización, para incluir la visión y para escuchar la visión, porque hay una gran riqueza, insisto, y si no se tiene en cuenta, pues estamos perdiendo una gran oportunidad. En ese sentido, quisiera también compartirles experiencias concretas que tenemos como FILAC. Estamos desarrollando ahora mismo un curso con participación de más de 40 lideresas y líderes profesionales indígenas de toda la región de América Latina, en coordinación con la Universidad Carlos III de Madrid, España, en la que hemos incluido de manera concreta el tema de las ODS y pueblos indígenas, con énfasis en mujeres y juventudes indígenas, en donde hemos logrado un diálogo intercultural objetivo, y hay unas propuestas que deberían tener en cuenta las instituciones y organizaciones que están liderando el proceso de implementación de las ODS y la Agenda 2030. En ese mismo sentido, tenemos previsto y vamos a desarrollarlo en el mes de agosto próximo, un segundo diplomado sobre ODS y mujeres indígenas de América Latina y Caribe. Ya el año pasado logramos desarrollar con mucho éxito el primer curso, primer diplomado. Ahora, por solicitud y pedido de las mismas mujeres indígenas de la región, vamos a desarrollar el segundo diplomado. Esto para decir que a la vez que es recomendable incluir de manera integral en todos estos procesos, también es importante pensar en incluir o organizar actividades y acciones específicas, como la que estoy comentando, de manera específica para las juventudes, para las mujeres, o para los sabios de los pueblos indígenas, que podían aportar muchísimo sus visiones, sus cosmovisiones, sus espiritualidades. Igualmente, hemos venido otra experiencia para indicar la importancia de la inclusión y la articulación intercultural con los pueblos indígenas, hemos venido acompañando y apoyando procesos de fortalecimiento cultural y lingüístico junto con la UNESCO, junto con la CEGIP, la Secretaría General de los Países de Iberoamérica, y en ese sentido hemos logrado el pasado 21 de abril que la cumbre de gobiernos y jefes de Estado de Iberoamérica aprobaran la creación del Instituto Iberoamericano de Lenguas Indígenas en el marco del decenio de las lenguas indígenas proclamado por la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas. ¿Esto por qué es importante? Es importante tener en cuenta en el proceso de implementación de las ODS porque tiene que ver mucho con los objetivos 4, 5, 10, 16 y 17 en el sentido de la inclusión de los distintos procesos culturales de los pueblos. Entonces, es posible, digamos, desde experiencias, hemos hecho un trabajo de informe, de estudios sobre la situación de las lenguas indígenas en América Latina y el Caribe, y la verdad, el estudio nos da cuenta que es muy preocupante. En pleno siglo XXI siguen desapareciéndose idiomas indígenas y junto a los idiomas pues desaparecen también aspectos culturales. Entonces es necesario especificar, así como hacer transversal en lo que sigue de la implementación de los objetivos del milenio estos puntos de vista. Finalmente, decir que creemos fundamental la visión complementaria entre ciencia y tecnología, que esto ya lo habíamos discutido en otro evento, junto con Caneos, UNOSA, la complementariedad entre la visión del desarrollo, ciencia y tecnología, digamos, facultativa de los laboratorios y la visión de ciencia y tecnología de los pueblos indígenas, que también son milenarios, tienen su estructura, solo que eso requiere una flexibilidad, yo diría, mental y de visión entre los científicos que se han formado largamente en las universidades más importantes del mundo, en los laboratorios y en las estructuras que ya sabemos de la academia, pero también con la visión de los sabios indígenas. Nosotros consideramos fundamental eso. Lo hemos discutido mucho en todo el proceso preparatorio hacia la cumbre de sistemas alimentarios, como ustedes saben, que se va a llevar a cabo la precumbre ahora durante este mes y la cumbre en sí en el mes de septiembre, y ha quedado clarísimo que si no se tiene en cuenta, simple y llanamente es muy difícil en la práctica concretar acciones específicas y objetivas en favor del desarrollo de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Entonces, la complementariedad, la articulación, aquí estamos hablando de los pueblos indígenas, pero igual diríamos otros sectores, el sector no indígena, las comunidades de base, los campesinos que producen comida, que producen diariamente distintas sabidurías, es fundamental. La participación de las mujeres y de las juventudes hoy más que nunca es fundamental, y en eso no está siendo tenido en cuenta en el proceso de desarrollo de los objetivos del milenio de desarrollo sostenible, pero tampoco en la Agenda 21. Quiero concluir diciendo que es necesario revisar y potencializar en lo que sigue, en los tiempos que faltan, sobre la Agenda 2030. Y sobre todo es fundamental la articulación entre procesos de crisis climática, que algunos llaman cambio climático. Nosotros preferiríamos que se diga que la verdad es que estamos en una crisis climática. Estamos afrontando una crisis climática toda la humanidad y tenemos que tomar en serio. Entonces, la articulación entre el proceso de la implementación del convenio marco de cambio climático, proceso de convenio de diversidad biológica y las ODS es fundamental. Los tres procesos deben articularse, y en este sentido sería muy importante que en estos cursos de formación, de capacitación, de conocimiento que estamos implementando, se tuviera en cuenta esa articulación, y más que la articulación en la parte formativa, importante la incidencia política en ese sentido. Esas son las ideas que quisiéramos dejar planteado. Esperamos que se tenga muy en cuenta. Como FILAC, seguiremos aquí tratando de articular esfuerzos con los colegas. Milín, de verdad que tu labor, tu liderazgo es fundamental. Nosotros estamos allí, al lado igualmente los otros colegas de las otras organizaciones, y a todos los participantes, decir que definitivamente tenemos que tomar en serio e incidir en los estados y gobiernos que son los responsables para que las ODS no se queden en el papel y que la participación indígena no siga siendo un discurso, sino que se garantice la participación efectiva, plena, y que se incluya los conocimientos y que se garantice el mejoramiento de las condiciones de vida, independientemente que no esté claramente y específicamente escrito en el contenido de los 17 objetivos, y que incluso no esté claramente establecido en la Agenda 2021, porque los pueblos indígenas están muy activos y tienen mucho que contribuir en favor de la humanidad toda. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Migwe. It's those challenges that you outline are so numerous. Is something which is, as we have been exploring and discussing for the last 2 years, this needs to be addressed. So I'd like to see how some of the solutions, as mentioned in the previous part, can be advanced from this part. So I'd like to invite Dr. Lilia to explore some of the potential solutions to the challenge that you mentioned. Lilia?
Hamahagas, everyone. I'm welcoming you in my language. I'm a Bashkir woman. I'm really impressed by the diversity of the presenters joining from around the world. Thank you so much for that. So today, in a very brief 3 minutes, I'll try to stay on time. Gabrielle, thank you so much for your passion that you bring to this work. I'll actually walk through some of the practical solutions in how Indigenous peoples are reclaiming sustainabilities. And sustainabilities is in plural form because it looks different for different lands. I'm joining you today from the Osoyoos Indian lands, and as several participants mentioned, Indigenous peoples are responsible for a lot of globally significant outcomes, the high biodiversity levels, the protection and nature-based solutions for climate action, and so on and so forth. But they're also faced with disproportionate risk, not only to kind of pandemic, but also natural hazards, floods, fires, so on and so forth. So it is within this context, and as Veronique said, connecting this kind of short-term goals to long-term objectives that I will be talking today. Next slide, please. So in particular, I will talk about the program that we developed here in Canada, Indigenous peoples, and this is a youth-led program. It focuses on, in terms of training and capacity development, the kind of the focus of this session, it focuses really on community-led solutions. So it's not the kind of general discussion, it really focuses on how the lives can be improved today and into tomorrow and for future generation. So some of the key aspects are it's Indigenous science-based, and it's very important what language you use. So it's not only traditional knowledge, it's Indigenous science. It's on par with Western science. It's land-based, it's based on community mapping. The intergenerational planning is a really important segment of it. The program is focused on capacity building to disasters in particular, but it touches on many different SDG goals, which is not the framework we really work with because it's not as meaningful at a local community level. So this is something that we need to think about, how to make it really meaningful at a local level and connect it to global outcomes. We have technical training, and really important in terms of participation of Indigenous peoples, peer mentoring component. So how are you learning, nation-to-nation learning? How is that happening? Next slide, please. And I just wanted to share a couple of kind of tools that are particular, I think, really valuable in the context of this session of connecting global kind of long-term planning, local outcomes through sustainable recovery and COVID-19 and climate action. So In the way different communities have done it, and I will highlight two examples here. So Matagami First Nation, which is in Ontario, Canada, they really looked at the kind of connecting satellite data with the local uses of the environment. So the land use, what is this used for? The trapping, the kind of the sacred ceremonial sites, and connecting that and using that knowledge base to leverage it for example, when a development corporation comes into their lands, how do we use this knowledge? So this is really mapped. Another example in Lillooet Nation, this was really participatory mapping. So you use photography, you use the kind of the stories, the elder stories, you use the traditional knowledge, you identify, for example, this is where the grass fire happens every year. What are some of the causes of this grass fire, right? You identify where the traditional medicines are and so on and so forth. So all of that, again, you can connect to kind of GIS mapping or satellite technology and other forms and kind of embed that local knowledge into the different data domains. So in addition, I would like to highlight some of the emerging tools that are coming up. So in addition to participatory mapping, asset mapping, and hazard mapping, there is a beautiful, and Gabrielle spoke about this, there is beautiful work happening on language and community resilience. So languages, Indigenous languages are deeply significant because language is knowledge of the land. So, for example, digital place naming atlases and different exciting initiatives that are happening. Biocultural labels is another thing. So that one combines human and machine readable digital text for connecting people, place, and data. So you actually kind of can have your move towards Indigenous data sovereignty, but connect it to the global tools. And I just wanted to give credit to Devin Neviu, Indijnikos is his traditional name, and Casey Gabriel and Sandy Henry from Lillooet Nation for this work. Next slide, please. And I only have 3 minutes, so this is the wrapping up slide. Really, I wanted to highlight the point that Gabrielle already said, that yes, we have 17 goals, but in Indigenous context, and not only in Indigenous context, all of these goals, I added here, I took the liberty of adding goal number 18, culture. We have to place this broad kind of spectrum of goals in the context of culture. And how we do it also really matters. I have a little screenshot here from the animation that we're working on right now with the Squamish Ocean Canoe family. I think it's really important how we communicate these goals. So it doesn't have to be really dry and kind of policy oriented. We have to work with emotion. We have to awaken the knowledge that communities hold and the passion that we carry, so that we hear that in our voices the way Gabriel speaks about his work. Thank you very much, Nalin. Thank you, everyone. And I'm happy to answer any questions via chat function. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilia. So I think what we would do is that with this issue that you identified and the solutions, how now they complement some of the space-based solutions. I'd like to invite our colleague, Dr. Shirish Ravan from the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs in Vienna, and their massive open online course. So before we begin this, I would request Dr. Shirish take the floor and then maybe direct for the question that he has to the audience. So Shirish, please go ahead.
Okay, good. So thank you, Milind. So now we'll take this session ahead into how Earth observation technology and contributes to capturing Indigenous knowledge to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And also we'll look at the capacity building opportunities that are offered by our office, as well as some of the public domain opportunities. But before that, we have this polling question for public. So may I request Madina to conduct the poll, please? Thank you.
The question, as you can see on the screen, is a key factor to enhance the role of high technologies, such as Earth observation, to reduce inequalities. So you can say either of those, whether it benefits it's enhanced skill, or whether it's enabling policy or the awareness.
have 52% of completion. Maybe we can wait a little more to get more responses.
Thank you.
I believe we can
I think we
stop
can
the
stop.
poll,
Yeah.
and I will share the results.
Good. Thank you. Results can stay here for a couple of minutes. So what we see here, we ask what is the key factor to enhance the role of high technologies such as Earth observation or satellite remote sensing in reducing inequalities. And majority says enhance skills and capacity. And this is what we are talking about here. So this, I was anticipating this, but I really wanted to have this to the audience, what they say. Of course, then access to the data is also very, very important, enabling policy environment, definitely. And awareness among decision makers. So top to bottom approach also works. If decision makers are more aware of high technologies, they can push the technologies down in their working level. But essentially, we can focus on enhanced skills and capacity. That is what people say, that is the most important factor in enhancing, role of technologies in reducing inequalities. That means also it is dealing with the indigenous knowledge. So we can close it now and go ahead. Okay, good. So since we got the poll result that capacity is very, very important, I just wanted to bring in what happened last year in 2020 because of pandemic. All the capacity building programs, number of training programs we used to conduct among member countries to promote use of space technologies for sustainable development or building resilience, all suddenly everything came to halt. We could not go anywhere, and same thing happened worldwide. So it's not only we. So, and we have centers, these 6 centers in the world. They are called Centers for Space, Science, Technology, and Education for Asia, Pacific, Africa, Latin America, and these centers basically cater the requirement of on-job training programs for the officials who are working. They can go and get trained in these technologies, and they go back and implement the programs and project. And none could conduct any training programs. So we took an advantage of situation anyway. So COVID is there. So what we can do? So we launched massive open online course on geospatial applications for disaster risk management. Here, I would like to also mention that with CANES, with Milin and FILAC, of course, we have also we have written already a paper that is on Earth observation technologies to capture indigenous knowledge for disaster risk reduction. That chapter will be published in Global Assessment Report on Disaster Risk Reduction, which is a flagship publication in the areas of disaster risk reduction. So we are focusing on indigenous knowledge. So this particular course, although it is generic, it has a lot of relevance to even indigenous community. It has 2 modules, and I will soon give the link also for the course. The track 1 is good for anyone, right from student who is not aware of Earth observation technology or decision makers or politicians or non-expert, because this particular module creates an awareness on what is Earth observation, what are disaster risk reduction frameworks, how they contribute, what are the policy frames, and all sorts of experience sharing. And once they complete track 1, they can get the certificate for track 1. And if they want to know details about skill building of using these geospatial applications, Earth observation technologies, then they can get into track 2, which is an advanced module. And this has been developed by United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs and our center in India. This is called Center for Space Science and Technology Education for Asia and Pacific, hosted by Indian Space Research Organization. So we 2 organizations have developed. So in 2020, when we launched this, with 16 organizations contributing to this particular MOOC, Massive Open Online Programs. You can see the list here, and this presentation will be shared with you, so you can go through this. So in 2020, the results are so good that more than 29,000 persons from 142 countries participated in this particular Massive Open Online Program. They attended at least few lectures, and more than 11,000, close to 12,000 participants already completed this particular program. We got a lot of feedback and also demand that we should launch this again. So this year we have launched this again for 3 more months. So phase 2 of this particular self-paced learning program is open, and this is where one can register. So I appeal all the participants, if you can register, at least try the track 1 that really gives a great idea about what Earth observation technologies can do for disaster risk reduction, and experts can then get into the phase 2, the track 2 of the program. So this is what I would like to request through this particular session. And then there is one more great opportunity. I'm sure that many countries have been taking this opportunity. We have this network of regional centers for space science and technology education, and this MOOC, which I just now talked, is launched in collaboration with the center that is based in India, hosted by Indian Space Research Organization. It's in service for 27 years. It was the first center of such kind. And then subsequently, we launched centers in all the continents. These centers conduct postgraduate diploma and master courses in remote sensing, GIS, satellite communication, satellite navigation, satellite meteorology, space law, and also specific courses on specific themes are also organized. All courses are financially supported, fellowships are offered, and we would like to see more and more participation of indigenous community in this, and they will be supported financially, because this provision exists with all the centers that they can pay the air ticket, they can provide you free notation fees, and they can also provide you the hostel. So this is a great resource, I think, available, and I would like to take participants to convey this message and take advantage of this particular program. These are 9 months diploma, postgraduate diploma programs. There are also master programs, and these are basically core capacity building programs. Now, how it is different from universities? So with that, I will end my talk here. Universities are normally focusing on skill building and students. Their target is student. Here, our target is those who are already working in different government departments or NGOs or private sectors. They are middle level professionals, and they would like to get new skills in the areas of space technologies. So, or NGOs as well. So they can come to this particular organizations on deputation, they attend the program, they go back and they build the programs based on these particular technologies. So these are some of the opportunities we wanted to bring in using this particular forum. Thank you, William. Back to you.
Thank you, Shirish. We are way beyond our time limit. And so I would like to conclude our session with the last comments and the most important from Professor Ilan Kalman, how we not to get into this, or how do we move forward from this COVID situation. So Ilan,
thank you.
For you.
Thank you very much. And my details are in the chat, so please do connect. Because today we have heard the problems, inequities, vulnerabilities, suffering. These are the continual disaster exposed by the coronavirus and many other hazards. Recovery is not returning to normal, because the normal caused the pandemic disaster. Instead, we need to do better than the choices which created the disaster by drawing on data and knowledge equitably, including satellite monitoring and local observations. The latter impacts individual actions, such as encroaching on ecosystems for food and livelihoods, as well as hand washing. We need to combine evidence-based, balanced exchange and interaction so that knowledges support each other to inform values and actions. All knowledge forms have advantages and limitations. Local sciences, vernacular, traditional, indigenous, are impressive in depth and breadth for explaining and interpreting their own environments and societies. But these knowledges might not always be able to include observations from deep underground, from millions of years ago, from other planets. and from phenomena which our human senses cannot detect. The rapid rate and large magnitude of ongoing social and environmental changes challenge any knowledge, any science which uses the past to predict the future. Meanwhile, scientific papers are typically published in academic English. They cannot always provide the local context and the deep understanding that people have from living in their homes for lifetimes and millennia. We need to combine different knowledge forms for their strengths while overcoming their gaps. This means embracing, but going far beyond the Sustainable Development Goals to overcome their limitations and problems, to incorporate prevention into recovery to avoid another pandemic, to avoid difficulties from human-caused climate change, and to stop other local and global disasters. This means looking beyond 2030, not neglecting new knowledge, but doing so much more with what we have. We've heard the solutions today: participations, sustainabilities, resiliences. Those are just words. We need your action. Now is the time together with all our knowledges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then that's the beautiful way you concluded this part. Now I'd like to invite Shivangi for our next, how do we take from here to the GNDR's solution that the GNDR is offering. Shivangi, please.
Thank you, Milind. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all of you. My name is Shivangi. I'm representing GNDR in capacity of Senior Regional Lead Asia and Europe. I begin from where Professor Ian left his reflection on the need for evidence-based data to inform the actions for resilience. I'll take a short time frame to kind of show my slides. I hope you can see the slides now. Yeah. So let me just begin by saying that views from the front line is the quick risk assessment tool to assess the progress towards the global frameworks, SFDR, Paris Agreement, and SDGs, that what we have been talking about. But it's a tool which captures the perspectives on risk and resilience of the communities most at risk. And the data results helps to measure the gaps and achievements against the progress made so far towards the priorities stated under these global frameworks. And how does this data help? It's an empowering tool for the local communities. It helps to bring on board the perspectives of communities most at risk. It makes the state accountable, and it informs the development processes by bringing on board the policy coherence and linking the local, national, and global dialogues. In terms of methodology, the most at-risk communities were selected based on hazard vulnerabilities profiling of the countries. The communities were purposefully sampled, and the disaggregated data collection were done on the basis of age, gender, people with disabilities through surveys and interviews. The data itself was fed by the local CSOs, and it was an easy tool for them to use. The data was also analyzed while we aggregated the data on Power BI to bring in the results that you will be able to see on the following slides. We have been able to reach to 50 countries through a program which is in partnership with European Union and USAID, where we are actually using a very concise tool called VFL Lite. So what we see is, this is just a glimpse of how the data platform looks, and it helps you to analyze through, as I mentioned, by country, by communities, by the areas they are living in, urban, rural, and disaggregated by age, gender, people with disabilities. And what you can see is a global slide which lets you know about the threats, barriers, consequences, and actions. And you can go to vfl.world to explore this data more. And I invite you all to really look at this data. It's very insightful. Now, before I end, I just want to emphasize on what is the contribution of this VFL methodology. It has strengthened the inclusion and collaborative processes across the stakeholders at the local level, and it has created a momentum of localization by fostering this community leadership. It has fed the community's needs into the development processes informed by the communities. And at the national level, the national advocacy plans are making state accountable. At the global level, it feeds into the policy dialogues, especially aiming at the policy coherence. With this, I would like to introduce my colleague and member, GNDR member, Mr. Jean from Rwanda, representing Man Disaster Organization, who implemented views from the frontline, and he will share his lived-in experiences. Over to you, Jean.
Thank you, Shivanji. My name is Jean Musengamana from Rwanda, and I represent GNDR as a national focal point and being a legal representative of Man Disaster Organization. I want to share my experience with Rwanda Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience because we have been carrying out this project in the 15 communities of Rwanda. This is a project that is funded by European Union and GNDR, and Man Disaster has worked out as a local partner in Rwanda to implement this VFL project. So it aims at strengthening the inclusion and the collaboration between at-risk people, civil society organizations, government, in the design and implementation of policies and practices to reduce the risks and strengthen the resilience through community local action plans and activities chosen by the community themselves and in a participatory approach with other stakeholders. So the project has three parts, which collection contributes to SDG 1, 5, SDG 6, SDG 13, SDG 16, and 17. So data collection was done through focus groups. Next slide. Now, we take one community in South, in Gisagara district. Jamtabazi is one of the communities that the VFL have been carried out, and we have collected data which shows that community emphasized that erosion is one of the priority threats that is causing a lot of catastrophes, plus the heavy rains. So we collected data through those consultations, the interviews, the focus groups, and the community intervention interviews. We go to the next slide. So, based on the data that we have collected, we came to one of the action of VFL that was local action plans and activities that we had out in those 15 communities to help them being resilient and have impact. So based on the data that collected in that community of Yamtabaz, we showed that more than 80% of the respondents who stressed that erosion is causing a lot of damages and lead to food insecurity. We can participate in water drainages as water drainages and irrigation as part of water harvesting and vertical terraces. This was a part of the community local action plans activities to build the resilience as it was designed in the implementation manual or process of the VFA 2019. So the activity carried out had a very significant impact in that community because the soil, which has been cropped out by erosion, are now maintained with its fertilizer. It means that if the community put the fertilizer in the terraces, so it is no longer being cropped out by erosion. So food insecurity is no longer a threat. The crop that have been damaged can be sustained by vertical terraces. We go to the next slide. Yeah, so community have now more knowledge on environmental conservation and land management. The local government authorities, maintenance, and committees to other communities. Through the Making Displacement Safer project funded by USAID's Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance and JNDR, is another project which will focus on the locally led DRR solutions for displaced population in urban areas. We shall also try to identify challenges and try the innovative solutions to make sure the displaced population are safe and being resilient, and also as a way of increasing the impact. The last slide.
Yeah, thank you, Jean. So, thank you, Jean, for sharing your experiences. And this was the example where the communities were empowered with this tool, and they could really bring out a good solution for their problem, and which had a long-lasting impact. So with this, Milind, I would stop here. If there are any questions, happy to answer that.
I guess what I would request maybe is that we would begin with again with Sammy and see if the questions can be addressed for all the three panels, if there is a 5 minutes before we are already over time. So Sammy, can I request you to intervene and see if we can get few questions for all the panelists for all the three parts?
Thanks a lot, Milind. I really believe that we are already 15 minutes beyond our time. So maybe the best thing to do is to combine and consolidate all the questions and answer things by responding to all the attendees with their questions. And we need actually to have a very good connections and follow up with the panel members and make sure all the questions are answered to the satisfaction of the speakers. We will also plan on sharing the presentations and sharing any papers and any information that will help the participants connect to all the tools that we have been presenting. We presented a lot of things, and we don't expect that things have been captured so quickly. We will also coordinate with the organizers, UNDESA and UNITAR, to ensure that the recording of the session will also be shared with the audience. If you allow me, Milind, I think can close the session, and I will give you the floor first to speak a few closing words, and then I will take it from there and close the session. You have the floor, my friend.
Thanks so much, Sammy. I just want to, again, all the panelists and participants who joined us in this effort, And as Sammy mentioned, this is something that we will take forward to the different forums at the UN that will be happening down the road. So just to conclude, from all of the partners, I would like to invite my PHILAC colleague if he just wants to add quickly one-line thanks or one-line message before we hand over back to the colleague. So Louis from PHILAC or Gabriel Miguel, if anyone wants to very quickly give the concluding message.
Muchas gracias, Milín. De verdad que estamos ante un gran desafío para que los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible en lo que sigue pueda implementarse de forma sustancial en favor del mejoramiento de las condiciones de vida de toda la humanidad y de los pueblos indígenas en particular. Así que muy agradecido por esta oportunidad, por este espacio, pero también quisiera aprovechar para animarlos a todos y a todas los que han participado en esta actividad a que consideren, incluyan a los pueblos indígenas en todos los trabajos, porque, como ya lo dije en la anterior intervención, hay mucho por aportar, hay mucho por aprender y hay mucha riqueza que los pueblos indígenas pueden contribuir para que los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible se hagan efectivos en la práctica, en la vida real. ¿Ya? Así que seguiremos trabajando, Milín y todos los demás colegas que hemos tenido la oportunidad de articular esfuerzos. Vamos a fortalecer más el esfuerzo desde el PHILAC para que estos procesos continúen en bien de nuestros pueblos y de toda la humanidad. Muchas, muchas gracias.
Gracias, Gabriel. Again, like on behalf of all the organizers for the issue, we had some translation interpretation, so we apologize for the inconvenience for the interpretation. So just before I hand over back to you, Sammy, and to conclude this session, I'd like to, my UNOSA colleague, if he wants to add some concluding thoughts on behalf of the UNOSA. UNOSA has been our consistent partner for the last 2 years. And so either Marcus or Shirish, Marcus, if you want to add some quick thoughts. Or Shirish, if you want to add some.
Thank you, Milin. Thank you. So it was really the poll that was conducted that revealed that capacity and skill, that is the most critical factor, and that is where we have to focus. So continuous efforts of capacity building are important, and in collaboration with PHILAC, CANIUS, and UNITAR and all, I think we can develop a little more focused solutions targeting, integrating indigenous knowledge in building, achieving sustainable development goals. So I think that would be learning for me as well from this particular session. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirish. And last thing to Shivangi on behalf of GNDR, if Shivangi wants to add just quick last thoughts. Shivangi?
Thank you, Milind. I think we had lots of learning today, but I think the most important learning is that the risk-informed development cannot be achieved if the development plans are not informed by the communities most at risk. And tools such as VFL and what we have seen from the beginning of presentations today gives us evidences to the policy deliberations which are happening in this forums such as HLPF or COP26, which is going to come in December. So thank you for giving us this opportunity. Thank you, Milind.
So with this one, Sammy, we would like to hand over back to you and to give the final closing remarks before we close the session.
Thank you very much, Milind. Thank you, colleagues, distinguished participants, government representatives, United Nations colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to thank you all for your active participation, for your time, interest, and interaction during the session of the SDG Learning, Training, and Practice at the high-level political forum. Our session has been about integrating recovery planning from COVID-19 building resilience, and strengthening policy coherence toward the SDGs. A special thanks to the session partners, Canyas International, FILAC, UNOSA, and GNDR for joining together and leveraging our expertise and sharing tools and methodologies, supporting the sustainable recovery from the pandemic, and ensuring that recovery effort will not be at the expense of achieving the SDGs. I also cannot thank enough Milind, my colleague, for his extensive work, his tremendous support. And really, Milind, you are the best connector. And you connect all together. You connected us all together in a great way. And we will keep connected and we will keep working together in supporting all the issues that we brought up in this learning session. I would like also to take the opportunity to thank the members of the UNDESA and UNITAR course team for the hard work, tremendous effort, and dedication that resulted in developing the timely course with its recovery focus and transformation toward the SDGs. As Milind said, we will plan on sharing with the audience, with the attendees, all the presentations, and we will keep supporting the attendees who will be going forward with taking the courses that we have overviewed, and actually to discuss any issues related to the content of our learning session today. It's another busy day at the UN at the high-level political forum, and we wish you all a very productive day. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Goodbye, everyone.
You.
And with this, we are concluding our session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.